Let's look at another way of graphing or drawing frequency distributions. Let's look at the histogram. And this is one of the most important and one of the most useful ways of describing frequency distributions. It's especially for ordinal, interval, or ratio data. So it's for data that's got an order to it that goes from one end to another. Whereas the bar chart was for nominal data mainly. This is for continuous data where we can, where there's one end is low and one end is high. Now, like a bar chart, the height of the bar represents the frequency. And as always, we need to label both axes. Here we've got the statistics exam score. So these were the 70 pieces of data that we had talked about earlier. Now we're saying that they're for a statistics exam. And then over here, we've labeled this axis as frequency, the number in each category. And the bins are down here. Each bin is represented by a bar, but there's no space in between them. And that's the big difference between a histogram and a bar chart, is that the histogram doesn't have space between the bars. And it's really important that we label the x-axis correctly. There's a number of ways that we can label the x-axis on histograms. We could do the bin ranges. We could put the class intervals. We could say, 95 to 99. That we could put 95 to 99 down there. That would work very nicely. And we could do that. We could also put the bin midpoints, like we have here 47, 52, 57, 62. That's a midpoint. We could also put the endpoints of the real limits, like 44.5 to 49.5. This would go to 49.5 to 54.5, and mark at the beginning and end of each bar. Whatever we do, we've got to do it clearly. I personally like putting the bin ranges or the class interval underneath each bar, and in fact that's what Excel tends to do also.